The woman everyone had been instructed to humiliate walked into that dinner party like she had no idea a trap had been set for her. Sanaa Osei carried herself with the kind of quiet grace that made rooms slow down, and that was exactly why they hated her. Across the room, Seung-jun sat in his wheelchair at the head of the table, paralyzed from the waist down and more dangerous than every standing man in that room combined. He watched her smile through the insults, watched her hold herself together, and felt something crack open in his chest that had been sealed shut for 11 years. He had not felt anything in 11 years, and now he felt everything at once. If you have ever watched someone survive a room that was designed to destroy them and found yourself rooting for that person with your whole heart, then this story is going to live inside you for a very long time. Subscribe right now because what Han Seung-jun does next is going to make you forget every other story you have ever heard. Trust me completely. The dinner party was held at the Lim family estate in Seongbuk-dong, a place where old money sat on silk cushions and sharpened its knives behind closed doors. The host was Chairwoman Lim Jeong-suk, 72 years old, white-haired, and possessing the smile of a woman who had buried 3 enemies before breakfast. The occasion was supposedly a celebration, an anniversary of the Lim Group's founding, 40 years of empire. But everyone in Seoul's upper circle knew the real purpose of the evening. Sanaa Osei had been invited for one reason only: to be made an example. Sanaa was 31, the director of international acquisitions at a mid-sized investment firm called Meridian Capital. She was Nigerian-Ghanaian, raised in Accra and educated in London, and she had committed the unforgivable crime of outbidding the Lim Group on a development deal in Incheon 3 months ago. A deal worth $600 million, a deal that Chairwoman Lim had considered hers by birthright, so the invitation to dinner had been sent. And Sanaa, who had been in Seoul for less than a year, who did not yet know how this city's teeth worked, had said yes. Han Seung-jun had not planned to attend. He never attended these performances. At 41, he ran the Han Syndicate from his penthouse on the 54th floor of a building he owned outright, and he moved through Seoul's underworld like a current beneath still water, powerful, invisible, absolute. The accident 11 years ago had taken the use of his legs. It had not taken a single other thing, not his mind, not his reach. Not the particular quality of stillness he had that made grown men stop speaking mid-sentence. His head of security, Park D1, had suggested he attend the Lim dinner simply to remind Chairwoman Lim that her 40 years meant nothing if Han Seung-jun decided they meant nothing. So he had come. He had parked his wheelchair at the far end of the table and prepared to be bored. Then Sanaa Osei walked in. She was wearing a deep burgundy dress that moved when she walked, and she walked like she had somewhere important to be even when she was standing still. Her hair was natural, pulled up, her jewelry simple. She scanned the room the way a person scans a room when they're trying to locate exits, which told Seung-jun immediately that she was smarter than the invitation had given her credit for. She found her seat, sat down, and smiled at the woman next to her. An honest smile, genuine. Completely unguarded, and in a room full of people who had not smiled genuinely since childhood, it landed like something foreign and precious. Han Seung-jun stared at her for 4 seconds before he caught himself. That had never happened before. He looked away and then looked back, which had also never happened before. Something had cracked open. He had no language for it. He filed it away and kept his face still and watched the evening begin. The attack started with the soup course. It was a woman named Mrs. Choi, Chairwoman Lim's second daughter-in-law, who opened the first wound. She leaned across the table with a smile like a paper cut and said in Korean, switching just slowly enough that Sanaa could follow, "I heard the Meridian Capital director doesn't actually speak Korean. I wonder how she managed to navigate a deal this size without a real translator." Laughter moved around the table like a wave. Sanaa's expression didn't change. She lifted her soup spoon, took a measured sip, and then answered in clean, fluid Korean. "My translator was excellent, Mrs. Choi, though I noticed the Lim Group's offer contained 3 calculation errors in the environmental impact section. I imagine that's what the translator was busy with." Dead silence. Then more laughter, different this time, uncomfortable, impressed. Mrs. Choi's smile had gone rigid. Han Seung-jun's hand, which had been resting on the arm of his wheelchair, went completely still. By the main course, Chairwoman Lim herself had entered the conversation. She did it with the grace of someone who had been the most powerful person in every room since 1984. She did not attack directly. She simply said, "Miss Osei, I find it admirable that companies like Meridian are beginning to compete at this level. It takes courage for smaller firms to reach above their station." A silence followed. Sanaa set down her fork. Looked at the chairwoman with the kind of patience that was itself a form of steel. "Meridian isn't above anything," she said. "We're exactly where we work to be. The Incheon deal proved that." Another silence, longer this time. Someone cleared their throat. Under the table, Han Seung-jun's hand had curled slowly into a fist. He was not sure when he had decided to be angry on behalf of this woman he had never spoken to. He was angry on behalf of this woman he had never spoken to. Then came the moment that changed the evening. A man named Director Beek, red-faced, deep into his 3rd glass of wine, leaned toward Sanaa with the particular boldness that expensive alcohol gave men who already thought too much of themselves. You know, he said loudly in English, I've heard these African firms use a lot of relationship tactics. He let the implication hang. I imagine a woman like you's very skilled at that kind of persuasion. The table went quiet in a different way. A cold way, Sanaa's face did something complicated. She did not look embarrassed. She looked like a woman deciding whether to be gracious or devastating. Before she could choose, a voice came from the far end of the table. Quiet, absolute. Seung-jun spoke in Korean without raising his voice, without turning his head, directing his words at Director Beek with the particular precision of a man who had been ending people's careers since he was 26. Director Beek, he said, apologize, now. And then I'd suggest leaving before I remember your wife's business license is up for renewal. Director Beek turned the color of uncooked meat. He apologized. He left shortly after. The room did not return to normal. There was no normal anymore. Han Seung-jun had spoken and now everything was recalibrated. Sanaa looked down the table at him. Their eyes met for the first time. He did not look away, neither did she. Later that night she found him on the estate's rear terrace. She had not gone looking for him. She had stepped outside to breathe and he was already there, his chair positioned toward the city lights. She almost retreated. He spoke first. You were going to destroy him yourself, he said. I interrupted. You did. Was that a problem? She came to stand at the terrace railing a few feet from him. I've been handling rooms like that one for 3 years in the city, she said. I didn't need saving. I know, he said. I wasn't saving you. I was stopping him from leaving with his dignity intact. She looked at him. That's a subtle distinction. It's the only kind I make. She almost smiled. He watched her almost smile and felt that cracked open thing in his chest do something warm and inconvenient. He asked her name. She told him. He introduced himself and she took a small, almost invisible breath because everyone in Seoul knew that name. You didn't have to do that in there, she said finally. No, he agreed. I know. They stayed on the terrace for 20 minutes without planning to. She talked about the Incheon deal. He listened the way people listen when they're not waiting for their turn to speak, when they're actually absorbing every word. When she finally said she should go inside, he said nothing, just watched her leave. Park Ji-won appeared silently beside him. Sir, find out everything about Meridian Capital's director, Seung-jun said. Everything, Park said nothing, which was how he said yes. The next morning, Sanaa arrived at the Meridian Capital offices and found a single white orchid on her desk with no card. Her assistant. Jae-young had no explanation. The building's security cameras showed a courier delivery at 7:12 in the morning. Sanaa looked at the orchid for a long moment, then put it in water and went to her meetings. That afternoon her phone rang from an unknown number. She answered. You left without saying goodbye, Han Seung-jun said. I didn't know we were the kind of people who said goodbye, she replied. We weren't, he said. I'm suggesting we become them. She was quiet for 2 seconds. How did you get this number? I get most things I'm looking for, he said. It should have felt like a threat. It didn't. That was the problem. She told him she was busy. He told her he knew. He did not call again that day. He sent nothing else. That restraint, that deliberate stillness somehow made everything worse. A few days later, Sanaa's colleague at Meridian, a man named David On who managed international relations with the particular enthusiasm of someone who believed his charm worked on everyone, told her at lunch that the Han Syndicate had been asking questions about her. Apparently Han Seung-jun himself, David said, leaning in, is interested in Meridian. He paused. Or interested in you, he smiled. Should I be worried about competition? Sanaa looked at him calmly. You should probably be worried about the Incheon follow-up report which you still haven't filed. She returned to her desk. She sat down, she pressed one hand flat against the surface of her desk and breathed carefully. She was not going to think about Han Seung-jun, she was going to think about her work. She thought about Han Seung-jun for 45 minutes before her next meeting. That evening her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number that she had not saved but recognized immediately. It said, there's a restaurant in Itaewon, Thursday at 8, tell me if you can't make it. No question mark. She stared at it, then she typed back, that's not how invitations work. He replied, I'll note that for future reference. Thursday at 8. She put her phone face down. She went to the restaurant on Thursday. The restaurant was small, private, tucked behind a door that didn't have a sign. The kind of place that required knowing someone to find it. He was already there when she arrived, his wheelchair positioned at a table by the window, and he was reading something on a tablet that he set aside the moment she walked in. He looked at her the way he had looked at her across the terrace. Like she was the most important thing in the room and he was irritated about it. They ordered food, they talked, it should have been awkward. It was not even slightly awkward, which was its own kind of alarming. He told her almost nothing about himself and somehow she learned everything. He asked her questions that no one had ever thought to ask, about her work yes, but also about why she had chosen Seoul, about her family, about what she was reading. She told him about the novel she was halfway through. He had read it. They disagreed sharply about the ending. She pointed at him across the table and said, you are completely wrong about that character's motivation, and he looked at her like she was extraordinary for arguing with him. Like he had been waiting for someone to argue with him for a very long time. When the evening ended, he did not touch her. He did not suggest a next time. He simply said, I enjoyed this, and there was nothing performative about it. On the ride home, Sanaa sat in the back of her taxi and stared out the window and recognized the specific feeling of being in trouble. The following week the trouble arrived from a different direction. Chairwoman Lim had not forgotten the Inchin deal or the dinner party, and she had decided that the most elegant revenge was a rumor. By Tuesday it had spread through the business community that Meridian Capital had used irregular methods to close the Inchin deal, that there were questions about Sanaa's professional conduct, that certain documents had been obtained improperly. None of it was true, all of it was damaging. Sanaa's CEO called her into his office on Wednesday morning with the expression of a man who wanted to believe her but was already calculating the cost. "This is a fabrication," Sanaa said. "I know," he said, "but fabrications require responses, and responses cost money and time and reputation." She left his office and stood in the hallway and felt the particular cold of watching something you built be threatened by someone with more power and less integrity. Her phone buzzed. Seung-jun. She stared at it for a long moment. She answered. "I heard," he said. "Just that. I don't need," she started. "I know what you need," he said. "You need the rumor handled. Tell me you'll let me handle it." "Seung-jun," she said, and it was the first time she had used his name without the formal title, and they both noticed it. "I'm not going to be the woman who lets a man fight her battles." "You're not," he said. "You're the woman who's going to let someone with useful resources do what useful resources are for. There's a difference." She was quiet. "The chairwoman has 17 business licenses connected to subsidiary companies," he said calmly. "4 of them are due for regulatory review this month. I know the 3 reviewers personally." He paused. "The rumor will be gone by Thursday." She should have told him no. She should have said she would handle it herself, which she would have eventually, though the damage would have been significant. She said, "Why?" "Because someone set a trap for you in a room I was in," he said, "and I don't allow traps in rooms I'm in." Silence. "Thursday," he said, and ended the call. The rumor was gone by Thursday. Not quietly, completely. A retraction from the original source, a vague but pointed statement from 3 industry bodies about the regulatory status of certain Lim Group subsidiaries, and a complete evaporation of the story from every channel it had appeared in. Sanaa sat at her desk and read the news feeds and felt something complicated. Gratitude, unease. The distinct sensation of being under someone's protection without having asked for it and not entirely minding. She called him. "Thank you," she said. "Don't," he said, not rudely, just firmly, like gratitude made him uncomfortable. "Why not?" "Because I didn't do it to be thanked," he said. "Then why did you do it?" A pause, the longest pause he had given in any conversation. "Because you deserved better than that room," he said finally, and she heard it, the thing underneath the words, the thing that had been building for 3 weeks, and she pressed her lips together and looked at her ceiling and decided she was going to maintain every professional boundary she had. She maintained them for 4 more days. On the 5th day, David asked her to dinner. Not as a colleague. Explicitly not as a colleague, his expression making that very clear when he stopped by her desk Friday afternoon. He said it with the confidence of a man who expected yes, who had always received yes, who considered himself self-evidently worth saying yes to. Sanaa was about to decline with the diplomatic firmness she had spent years developing when her phone lit up on the desk between them. Seung-jun. On the screen for both of them to see. David glanced at it. His expression shifted into something that tried to be casual and was not. "Popular evening," he said. Sanaa picked up the phone. "I need to take this," she said. She did not explain. David left. She answered. "How are you doing that?" she said. "Doing what?" "Calling at exactly the right moment." She heard something in his breathing that might have been satisfaction. "I'm not doing anything," he said. "I was calling to ask if you wanted to take a walk tomorrow morning. There's a route along the Han River I like." "You like walks," she said slowly. "My chair handles well on flat surfaces," he said, and there was something so matter-of-fact about it, so undefended that it landed somewhere deep. "Yes," she said, "tomorrow morning." They walked, or she walked, and he moved alongside her, along the Han River at 7 in the morning when the city was still soft-edged and quiet. He knew the path well. He knew which sections had good views and which had the best light. He told her about discovering this route a year after the accident, when he had still been furious at everything, when the wheelchair had felt like a sentence. He said it plainly, without performance, without asking for anything in return. She listened without flinching and without pity, which he noticed. She asked what the accident had been. He told her. A car crash, a road he had taken too fast, a passenger in the other vehicle who had survived but lost the use of her left hand, which still followed him everywhere. He told her that last part quietly, like it was something he rarely said out loud. She said, "Is she okay now?" He looked at her. "I made sure she was," he said. "I've been making sure she was for 11 years. She nodded. They walked further in silence that felt like understanding. When they parted, he held her gaze for a moment and said, "Next Saturday," she said. "Yes." Next Saturday became the following Saturday. Walks became dinners. Dinners became evenings on his penthouse terrace watching the city, her in the chair she had claimed as hers, him beside her, 2 people building something without acknowledging they were building it. Park Di-won, who had known Han Seung-jun for 15 years, began noticing changes. The man came out of his office more. He smiled occasionally, which was alarming. He sent things, not extravagantly, a book she had mentioned wanting, a specific tea she had told him she couldn't find in Seoul, an extra security detail for her building that she didn't know existed yet. He tracked the news around Meridian Capital the way he tracked threats, because to him, they were the same category. 6 weeks after the dinner party, Sanaa told her best friend Adiz about him during a video call. Adiz, who was in Lagos, who had known Sanaa since secondary school and who had been trying to get Sanaa to admit she had feelings for someone for approximately the entire time Sanaa had been in Seoul, sat up very straight when the name Han Seung-jun came up. "The Han Seung-jun," she said, "the one who runs." "Yes, Sanaa, I know, do you, because the way you just said his name." "I said it completely normally." "You did not say it completely normally, you said it like it's your favorite word." Sanaa pressed the bridge of her nose. "We're just spending time together. People in this story always say that," Adiz said cheerfully, "and then they end up married." "Goodbye, Adiz. Subscribe and like and tell me what happens next. Goodbye." She ended the call and sat in her apartment and looked at the message he had sent an hour ago, which was a photograph of a section of the Han River path with morning light on it, captioned only, "Next week." She smiled at her phone like a person who was not admitting anything. The thing about Han Seung-jun's world was that it did not stay quiet simply because he had found something worth protecting. His world was constitutionally incapable of quiet. The Han Syndicate had 3 active territory disputes with a rival organization called the Jeong Network, led by a man named Jeong Byung-soo who was younger than Seung-jun, less patient, and significantly less intelligent. Jeong Byung-soo had been watching the Seung-jun with the focus of a man who knew he could not beat him directly and was looking for a side door. He found the side door the same way Chairwoman Lim had found her weapon. He found Sanaa. Sanaa first became aware that something was wrong on a Tuesday when Jae-young, her assistant, mentioned that a man had come to the Meridian Capital lobby asking to speak with her and had been turned away. The man had not left a name. 2 days later, a black car she did not recognize sat outside her building for 3 hours. She noticed it. She told herself she was being paranoid. She was not being paranoid. That Friday, she mentioned the car to Seung-jun during their evening call, and the quality of his silence changed in a way she had learned to pay attention to. "Describe it," he said. She described it. Another silence. "Sanaa," he said, and his voice had gone to that particular register, the one that was quiet and absolute. "I need you to do something for me." "What?" "Don't leave your building alone this weekend." "Seung-jun, what's happening?" "I'm handling it." "That is not an answer." "It's the answer I have right now, please." That word, the same word she had noticed at the dinner party the first time he had ever deployed it, please, from a man who had clearly not said please in years. "All right," she said, "but you're going to tell me everything." "Yes," he said, "when it's handled, I'll tell you everything." He ended the call and immediately called Park D1. What Seung-jun had identified was that Jeong Byung-soo had discovered the pattern of his evenings, his dinners, his walks, the way his schedule had reorganized itself around one specific person, and had drawn the obvious conclusion. The obvious conclusion was a gift, an obvious target. Park and 2 members of the security detail moved to Sanaa's building that night without her knowledge. By Sunday, they had traced the surveillance vehicle. By Monday morning, Seung-jun had a very specific conversation with a very specific intermediary, and by Monday afternoon, the black car was gone and Jeong Byung-soo had received a message that made his understanding of the situation significantly clearer. Seung-jun did not tell Sanaa about Jeong Byung-soo that week. He intended to. He was organizing the information into something that would make sense to someone who lived outside his world. But before he could arrange the conversation, something else happened, which was that David On came back. David appeared at the entrance of the restaurant in Itaewon on a Thursday evening, the same restaurant Sanaa and Seung-jun had made their own, at a table near the back, with a woman who was not Sanaa and a demeanor that suggested he was performing casualness. He looked up when they arrived. He looked at Sanaa the way men look at women they wanted and lost before they recognized they had lost. He stood to greet her. He shook Seung-jun's hand and spoke to him with the elaborate respect of someone who was frightened and trying not to show it. Then he said to Sanaa, "You look incredible." Simple, direct, intended to land in front of the man beside her. Seung-jun did not react visibly. His face remained its usual carved stone composition. His hand, which had been on the table near Sanaa's, went still. Sanaa thanked David pleasantly and moved toward her table. Seung-jun followed. He said nothing about it during dinner. He was perfectly composed. He ordered. He asked her about her week. But his eyes moved to David's table twice in 90 minutes, which, for a man who never glanced at anything twice, was its own kind of earthquake. After dinner in the car, Sanaa turned to look at him in the dim light. "You were watching David on all evening." "I was watching the room," he said. "You were watching him specifically." A pause. "He looks at you in a way I don't like." "I'm not his," she said, and then the words sat between them because the natural follow-up to that sentence was something neither of them had said yet. He turned to look at her. The city moved past the windows. No, he said carefully, you're not. But. But I find myself extremely interested in who you are, he said, his voice quiet and precise, and I find other men's interest in you to be something I have to actively manage. She looked at him. That's the most honest thing you've said to me. It's the most honest thing I've said in years, he replied. She looked down at her hands. Seung-jun, she said, I know what you are, I know the kind of world you move in. And I am a woman who has spent her entire career building something that can't afford to be tangled up in. I know, he said, you've told me. Then why are we still doing this? He was quiet for a long moment. Because whatever this is, he said finally, I'm not capable of stopping it, and I don't believe you are either. She didn't answer. The car continued through the city. She didn't tell him to stop. She looked out the window and he watched her reflection in the glass, and neither of them moved away. The following week was the week everything tilted. Sanaa had a business dinner, a required one, hosted by a Japanese investment group visiting Seoul, the kind of formal evening that required her full attention and produced most of the Meridian capital's significant partnerships. She told Seung-jun about it. He said nothing notable. The evening was professional, productive, and entirely unremarkable until 9:15, when she stepped onto the hotel terrace for air and found a man she did not recognize waiting beside the railing. He was well-dressed, middle-aged, with the kind of smile that didn't involve his eyes. He introduced himself as a representative of the Jeong network. He said this pleasantly. He said he had a message for her. The message was that her continued connection to Han Seung-jun represented a liability. That Meridian Capital's position in Seoul could be simplified significantly if she made certain choices. He said all of this while smiling. He said it quietly so no one on the terrace overheard. Then he handed her a card and walked away. Sanaa stood at the railing for 30 seconds. Then she called Seung-jun. He answered before the second ring. There's a man from the Jeong network, she said, her voice perfectly level. He just left my terrace. He had a message for me. Seung-jun said nothing for 5 seconds. Then, are you safe right now? I'm fine, I'm at the hotel. Don't leave the hotel, not alone, I'm sending Park. You already have people on me, don't you? It wasn't a question, a pause. Yes, he said, since 3 weeks ago. You should have told me. Yes, he said again, I should have, I'm sorry. She was quiet. We need to talk, she said. Yes, he said, tonight, come here when you're done. She ended the call and stood on the terrace for 1 more minute and let herself feel the shape of the situation she was in, the size of it, the weight of it, before she smoothed her expression and went back inside to close the partnership she had come for. Park arrived by 10. She was in the lobby. He was a broad, quiet man with steady eyes, and he inclined his head when he saw her as though she were someone important, which she was beginning to understand she was in a context she hadn't chosen. The drive to Seung-jun's building was quiet. She rode the private elevator to the 54th floor. He was waiting in the living room, not working for once, simply waiting, and when she came in he looked at her with an expression that was not his usual controlled still. He looked like a man who had spent 40 minutes in active fear for someone else and was not accustomed to that feeling. Sit down, he said, tell me everything. She sat, she told him, he listened without interrupting. When she finished, he turned his chair toward the window and was quiet for a long moment, his hands still on the armrests. The Jeong network has been watching you since they identified you as connected to me, he said. I knew, I moved on it last week, apparently not decisively enough. Seung-jun, I should have told you. He turned back to face her. I was managing it the way I manage everything, as an internal problem without involving you. That was wrong. She looked at him. You were protecting me without asking me if I wanted to be protected. Yes. I needed to know, she said. I know, he said. I'm telling you now everything, the Jeong network, what I've done about it, what I'm planning to do. You deserve to know what world you've stepped into because of me. And he told her all of it. The history with Jeong Byung-soo, the territorial dispute, the specific threat, the security detail he had placed, the intermediary conversation, what had been said, what the likely response would be. He spoke for a long time and she listened to all of it, and when he was done she was quiet for a moment. What happens now? I end this, he said, completely and finally. Jeong Byung-soo will understand very clearly that you are not a variable, and if he doesn't. He will, Seung-jun said, and there was something in his voice that required no further clarification. She looked at him across the quiet room. He was watching her. Are you going to leave? He asked. It was a very small question from a very large man. She heard what was underneath it. I don't know what we are, she said. I know, he said, but are you going to leave? She breathed. Not tonight, she said. He nodded once. Something in his face loosened by a degree that would have been invisible to someone who didn't know how to read him. They talked until 2 in the morning, not about danger, about everything else. She told him about Accra, about her parents, about the moment at 16 she had decided she would run international business and had told her father, who had laughed, not unkindly, and she had used his laughter as fuel for 15 years. He told her about his father, who had built the syndicate from nothing and died believing his son would run it with the same brutality he had, and the particular grief of inheriting something you had always had complicated feelings about. He told her about the accident with a detail he hadn't given before, the sound of it. He had not talked about the sound of it with anyone. She listened without filling the silence that came after, which was the right thing to do. When she finally stood to leave, he said her name once. She turned. "Stay," he said. "Not like that," he added quickly. "Just stay tonight. Park will take the couch. You can have the guest room. I don't want you alone in the building until I've handled this." She studied him. "This is not how normal people manage security," she said. "I'm not a normal person," he said. She took a slow breath. "Guest room," she said, "obviously." "Obviously," he repeated, and the corner of his mouth did something she was beginning to treasure. The guest room was large and spare and had a small window overlooking the city. She lay in the dark and listened to the quiet of his penthouse, which was different from her apartment's quiet. His quiet had weight to it, presence. She looked at the ceiling and acknowledged to herself, fully and without further avoidance, that she was falling in love with Han Seung-jun. She had been falling for several weeks. She had been falling since the terrace, maybe since the dinner table. She lay with that knowledge for a long time before sleep came. He was awake before she was. When she came into the kitchen at 7, he had already been to his private gym and changed, and there was coffee ready in the exact proportion she preferred, which she was fairly certain she had only mentioned once in passing. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at him. He looked back. "Good morning," was both said. Something in the air between them that morning was different. Lower, warmer, more settled, like a room where the furniture had finally been arranged correctly. She sat at the counter and drank her coffee, and they talked about nothing for 20 minutes. It was the most comfortable she had ever been in someone's space. 3 days later, Seung-jun met with Jeong Byung-soo directly. This was not a normal occurrence. Direct meetings in his world were considered nuclear options, reserved for situations that had moved past subtlety. He had parked with him and 2 others, and he met Jeong in a building in Mapogu, a neutral location, and he said the things that needed to be said without raising his voice once. Jeong Byung-soo was 29 years old, and he had built his network on the assumption that Han Seung-jun was slowing down, that the wheelchair was a limitation, that 11 years of controlled management had dulled something. He understood in that meeting room in Mapogu that he had fundamentally miscalculated all 3 points. They reached an agreement. The terms were entirely Seung-jun's. Jeong signed where he was told to sign. He left the meeting with all of his fingers and none of his leverage, which was a better outcome than he had reason to expect. Seung-jun called Sanaa on the drive home. "It's handled," he said. Completely, he said. "You're safe, Meridian is safe, it's over." She was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "Don't," he said. "You said that before," she replied. "You said don't thank you, because I don't do this to be thanked." "Then what do you do it for?" The car moved through evening traffic. "You know why," he said quietly. She closed her eyes. "Seung-jun," she said. "Yes, come over tonight, I'll cook." A pause that was longer than his pauses usually ran. "Yes," he said. He came. She cooked Ghanaian food, jollof rice, fried plantains, chicken. The penthouse, her apartment, had never smelled like this. He sat at her small kitchen table and watched her move around the kitchen and felt something that he had no armor against. She fed him. He told her it was the best thing he had eaten since his grandmother's cooking, and she laughed and called him dramatic. And he said he was not being dramatic, and they argued about it gently for several minutes, and it was the most ordinary thing that had ever happened to him. After dinner they sat on her balcony in the October cold, and she brought blankets and she sat very close to him, not for warmth or not only for warmth, and he reached out and took her hand. Just that. He held her hand and looked at the city, and she felt his thumb move once across her knuckles, and she turned to look at him, and he was already looking at her, and the distance between them was very small, and they both knew it, and neither of them moved for a long moment. "Sanaa," he said. "Yes," she said, and it wasn't an answer to anything he had asked yet. He leaned toward her slowly, deliberately, giving her every opportunity to decide, and she met him halfway. It was nothing dramatic, just the end of a very long fall caught. She pressed her hand against his chest and felt his breath change, and the city lights blurred at the edge of her vision, and the October cold was completely irrelevant. He held her face like she was worth being careful with, like she was something he had been afraid of losing before he had properly had her. They stayed on the balcony long after the city went dark. The morning was when the fear came. She woke before him, or rather woke knowing he was in the other room, because he had stayed and lay in the gray morning light of her bedroom and felt the specific shape of her own terror. She was in love with a man who ran the most powerful criminal syndicate in Seoul. She had agreed to nothing formal. They had said nothing formal. She was a professional woman who had spent a decade building a reputation on precision and control, and she had just spent an evening being held by someone whose world could destroy everything she had made with a single phone call to the wrong person. What if the Jeong network was only the first? What if staying close to him meant everything she had built becoming a target forever? What if she was already so deep that leaving was harder than continuing, and both options were terrifying? She got up quietly, made coffee, stood in her kitchen in the early morning silence, and tried to think clearly. When she heard him moving in the living room, she had already made a decision that her heart had not agreed to. He came in to find her dressed and composed and holding her coffee with both hands. He looked at her. "You're thinking about leaving," he said. It was not a question. She looked at him. "I don't think I can do this," she said. "What this is," she added. "What we are." My life doesn't have space for, she stopped. For what, he said, his voice was even too even. For that much risk, she said. He was quiet for a moment. I understand, he said. She blinked. She had expected argument. You deserve to make that decision, he continued. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I am what I am. My world is what it is. He moved toward the door, picked up his jacket. Seung-jun, she said. He stopped. He didn't turn around immediately. Take care of yourself, he said, and then he left, and she stood in her kitchen and felt the particular silence of a departure and told herself this was the right thing. She believed it for 4 days. 4 days of working normally. 4 days of seeing David on across the office and feeling nothing. 4 days of waking up at the exact right time without any particular reason to be awake early. 4 days of walking the Han River path alone on Saturday morning and knowing every good viewpoint because she had been shown them by someone who knew this route the way you know something that matters to you. On the 4th evening, Adiz called. You look terrible, she said on the video call by way of greeting. I'm fine. Sanaa, I've known you for 23 years. You look like someone who made the sensible choice and is absolutely furious about being sensible. I made the right choice. There are 2 categories of right choice, Adiz said, leaning forward. The kind that feels like relief and the kind that feels like removal. Which one is this? Sanaa said nothing. That's what I thought, Adiz said. The risk doesn't go away because you leave, sweetheart. You were already in it. You were in it at that dinner party. The only question is whether you were in it alone or not. The next morning, Sanaa called Seung-jun. He answered on the 2nd ring, his voice neutral, cautious, like a man standing behind a door he wasn't sure he should open. I want to finish the conversation, she said. Which conversation? The one where I ran away from it. A pause. All right, he said. Where? Bring the walk, she said. The river path, Saturday, 7 in the morning. She heard him breathe. 7 in the morning, he said. Yes. He was already there when she arrived, which she should have expected. The morning was cold, pale, the river catching early light in the way she had learned to love about Seoul. She came to stand beside him and they both looked at the water for a moment before she spoke. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't scared, she said. I know, he said. The risk is real. I know that. Your world has teeth that can reach into mine. Yes, and I need you to be honest with me about that, about everything. I can't live in managed information. I can't be someone you protect without telling. I know, he said again. I was wrong to do that. I won't again. She looked at him. He was watching the river. What are you actually offering me, Seung-jun? He turned to look at her. Something in his face was fully open in a way she had not seen before. Everything, he said. That's not specific. Everything specific, he said. My time, my attention, my honesty. My protection, the transparent kind you agreed to. Whatever version of my world you're willing to know. He paused. And I'm offering you the thing I haven't offered anyone in 11 years, which is that I want you permanently. She looked at him for a long moment. The river moved. Permanently is a large word, she said. Yes, he said. I know. She reached out and took his hand. He looked down at it, at their hands, and then back at her. Okay, she said. We do this, the real version. No more managed information, no more you deciding what I can handle. We do this as partners. His hand tightened on hers. Partners, he said, and the word sounded like something he had been building toward without knowing the name of the destination. They walked the path together. The city woke up around them slowly. She told him about Adiz's phone call. He almost laughed, which was the best thing she had ever seen. He told her about the 4 days, what they had been like from his side. She listened to that carefully, understanding what it meant for a man like him to admit to 4 days of sitting with absence. By the time they reached the best viewpoint on the path, the one with the wide bend in the river and the city rising behind it, they had said most of the things that needed saying. He stopped his chair. She stood beside him. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He produced a bracelet, silver, simple, and held it out to her. She stared at it. When did you? The day after the dinner party, he said. I saw it and bought it before I knew your name, which I was aware was irrational. She took it. You've been carrying it for 2 months? I'm patient, he said. She put it on. He watched her put it on. Han Seung-jun, she said. Yes, you are the most unexpectedly romantic person I have ever encountered. Don't tell anyone, he said. It would ruin my reputation. She laughed. He watched her laugh and did not try to manage the expression on his face. The months that followed were the kind of months that built something structural. She met his grandmother in November, Madame Han, a woman of 78 who still managed to make everyone in the room feel they were being evaluated. Madame Han looked at Sanaa for a very long time, asked her about Accra and about the Incheon deal and about what she thought of Seoul's winters. Then she said to Seung-jun in Korean, she has good sense and better eyes. Stop being impossible and marry her before she develops better sense. Seung-jun said he would take that under advisement. Madame Han told him advisement was for politicians and he was wasting everyone's time. Sanaa, who had followed most of it, pressed her lips together and studied the ceiling. He met Adiz over video call in December, which Sanaa had orchestrated with the specific goal of making him understand that Adiz would not be managed and he might as well begin as he meant to continue. Adiz spent 15 minutes asking him questions at a speed that most interviewers could not sustain. He answered all of them. Adiz said afterwards, privately to Sanaa, he's terrifying and I think I love him. Sanaa said, keep that to yourself. Adiz said, I'm already planning the wedding. Sanaa said goodbye. The Han Syndicate's territory dispute resolved by the end of the year, on terms that were entirely favorable and that Jeong Byung-soo had the sense not to contest. Seung-jun began a restructuring process that moved several of the syndicate's operations toward legitimacy, a process he had been considering for years, and which Sanaa's presence in his life had accelerated, not because she had asked him to, but because having someone worth building a different future for made the different future more available as a concept. She did not know about the restructuring until he told her in February. He told her everything, as promised. She listened, asked sharp questions, offered thoughts that he found useful, and told him she was proud of him in a way that made him look at the wall for a moment and then at her. "I'm not easy," he said, a statement that was unnecessary but seemed important to him to say. "I have noticed that," she said. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, and those 4 words did something to his face that she was going to spend the rest of her life being glad she witnessed. Chairwoman Lim sent a letter of congratulations in March, a brief, carefully worded letter that addressed itself to both of them and expressed wishes for their continued success. It was the most graceful retreat Sanaa had ever witnessed from someone who did not retreat gracefully. She showed it to Seung-jun. He read it. "She's terrified," he said. "I know," she said. "It's a good letter," she added. He looked at her. "You're too generous." "I'm strategic," she said. "There's a difference." He shook his head slowly. "I learn something new about you every week," he said. "That's the idea," she said. In April, on a morning that started like the Saturday mornings they had made into their own tradition, Seung-jun stopped at the best viewpoint on the river path and did not continue moving. She stopped beside him and waited. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the river, and then he turned to look at her. He did not make a speech. He was not a man who made speeches. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a ring. Simple, precise, a single stone. He held it out toward her. "I know what I am," he said. "I know what this costs you. I know you have spent years building something that has nothing to do with me. I'm asking you to let me be part of it anyway. I'm asking you to let me be your partner permanently." He paused. "Specifically and permanently," he added, referencing their conversation by the river from 6 months ago. She looked at the ring. She looked at him. The city shimmered behind him in the April morning light. "Yes," she said. He put the ring on her finger. She pressed her other hand against the side of his face. He turned his head slightly and pressed his lips to her palm, and she felt that small gesture in her entire chest. Park D1, who had been positioned at a discreet distance along the path with the other security detail, visibly exhaled. One of the younger guards asked him what had just happened. Park looked at him. "Something that took 11 years, he said, "and 2 months. He did not explain further. The wedding was in June, at a venue they chose together, which meant they spent 3 weeks arguing about it before finding a place they both immediately agreed on when they saw it. A garden in Buckshan with old walls and light through wooden screens and enough space for the specific combination of his world and hers that they had assembled. Madame Han sat in the front row and looked satisfied. Adiz flew in from Lagos and cried from the moment Sanaa appeared in the doorway. Sanaa wore gold. Seung-jun wore black, which she had not tried to change. His vows were brief, precise, and went through her like weather. She told him that she had walked into that dinner party alone and come out of it with something she hadn't known to look for, and that she was done looking for anything else, and there was a sound from the assembled guests that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh but somewhere between the two. Park D1 was his best man. When asked to say something, Park stood up and said, "I've worked for this man for 15 years. I've watched him make decisions that moved millions of dollars and thousands of lives. I have never not once seen him nervous about anything." He paused, "until he bought a bracelet on the second day of knowing her and carried it in his pocket for 2 months. Seung-jun looked at the ceiling. Sanaa looked at her husband. "He was nervous," Park said. "He wouldn't admit it. But I could tell." He raised his glass. "So could she." She covered her mouth. Seung-jun reached over and took her hand, and the look he gave her was not the carved stone face the world knew, not the controlled stillness of a man who ran an empire from a wheelchair and made decisions that ended careers. It was simply him, looking at her with everything unlocked. They went home at midnight to the penthouse that had been cold and quiet and was now something else entirely. 7 months later, Sanaa sat in the kitchen of the 54th floor penthouse in the early morning with a cup of tea she was not drinking, staring at a small piece of plastic with 2 lines on it. She had counted them 3 times. She set it on the counter. She looked at it. Then she looked at the kitchen, at the apartment that had stopped being his apartment and become theirs, at the evidence of their combined life that was everywhere, a book on the counter that was hers, a pair of shoes she'd kicked off by the couch, the blanket she'd bought for the terrace that was now a permanent fixture. She picked the test up again. She set it down. She heard him moving from the direction of his home office, the particular sound of his chair on the floor. He came in and saw her at the counter and looked at her the way he had learned to look at her when something was happening that she hadn't told him yet. "What is it?" he said. She turned and showed him. He went very still, then he moved toward her and took the test from her hand and looked at it for a long moment. When he looked up, she saw something in his face she had never seen before, something that went past the usually locked interior, past even the moments they had shared, past everything. He was completely and helplessly undone. "Sanaa," he said. "I know," she said. He reached up and took her face in both his hands. I know, she said again, softer. He pressed his forehead to hers, the gesture he reserved only for the moments too large for words. She felt him breathe, she felt her own eyes burn. A family, he said, his voice was rough. Yes, she said. He held her for a long time in the kitchen while Seoul woke up outside the windows. The city that had been the setting for a dinner party designed to humiliate her. For a terrace meeting that cracked something open in a man who had been sealed shut for a decade. For walks along a river. For danger, for fear, for a ring on a morning in April. For this ordinary, extraordinary morning where everything was further than either of them had known to hope for. Han Seung-jun, who had not felt anything in 11 years, felt everything. And for the first time in a very long time, he was not managing it. He was simply in it.